Pouring the concrete for the new shop all starts with demolition. It's about 2/3 existing concrete that's cracked and broken and looking a little bit worse for wear. I didn't film too much of the demolition, but it all pretty much went like this. Break the pieces, lift the pieces, and put them in the dumpster with the skid steer. Surprisingly, concrete, solid as it seems, is actually kind of fragile without an internal structure binding it all together. The slab we're removing here actually has wire mesh running through parts of it, but any sections that were left unsecured by the wire mesh had cracked and broken over time. And with some good old-fashioned hammer swinging, it broke into a couple pieces so it could be hauled away. This section of concrete was actually still in good condition. We planned on keeping it, but eventually realized that it wasn't going to match the new concrete and was going to be a bit tricky to work around. After all the concrete was taken out, it was time to deal with the dirt. We had 2 to 3 feet of really bad dirt in some sections, which explains why the previous concrete held up so poorly. We ended up removing as much dirt as we could, which required an extra dumpster, then bringing an extra load of gravel to backfill and level the surface. We used a rolling compactor to make sure all the gravel would be sitting nice and tight underneath the concrete to mitigate as much settling and movement as possible for all the years that the concrete will have to hold up. Then all the mating edges of the existing concrete were saw cut to make a nice finished transition between the new and the old pieces that lead down the driveway. Now it's finally time to pour some concrete. We had to use a hose and pump since it's a pretty long run from the driveway. I actually decided to pay more for the pump and leave the concrete truck in the street instead of trying to drive a 40,000-pound concrete truck over my already cracked driveway. This concrete hose pumps about 1 cubic meter every minute, so needless to say, the guy controlling the hose has to know exactly where the mix is going at all times. One false move and you've got lots of wet concrete everywhere you don't want it. We also decided to place rebar in the footing where the new shop is going to sit, along with wire mesh that overlaps and runs through the entire concrete pour. Concrete is an interesting material. In its liquid state, it's not exactly liquid and not exactly solid, so you can suspend things inside it and it holds its shape pretty well in a form. So as we're doing the pour, we have to make sure we're pulling up the wire mesh into the concrete slab so it's suspended once the slab dries. Running through the middle of the concrete, the wire mesh is very effective, but if we were to just leave it on the bottom, it wouldn't be much help. Once we've got enough concrete on the ground, a long screed is used to push down the aggregate and level out the top surface of the concrete. This is used by 2 people on either side and is basically a long straight edge. Then a gas-powered vibrating screed is used in an extra pass to really pull a nice smooth surface over the top. Concrete is also kind of an interesting process when you're talking about labor. The surface prep grading and leveling of the dirt and gravel is 1 or 2 people, but the pour is where it gets interesting. Once that pump starts pushing out mix, it's all hands on deck and everybody has a job to do. Whether it's the boss man pulling a gas-powered 10-foot screed, the guy rounding all the edges of the form with the trowel, or the youngins pulling up the wire mesh to suspend it in the concrete, all of these things come together with the correct timing and work ethic to hopefully create something long-lasting as well as attractive. At this point, we've emptied 1 truckload of mix and some of the final steps are being done on the pieces that were just poured, making sure all of the edges are rounded over and using a long-handled trowel to do some of the final smoothing. The actual pouring of the concrete only took a couple hours, but it's been days of working the ground, setting the form, and making sure everything's properly prepped to get the best result possible. And before any of that can happen, there are weeks of thought that went into the mix to use, the thickness and size of slab and footings, accounting for any buried gas lines, electrical lines, and communications lines. Not only that, but what we're pouring ended up being a completely different shape and more square footage than the original concrete that was in this location. And even with all the prep work, mistakes were still made. I'm not a concrete guy, a job site foreman, or a contractor. So although I know what I picture as the ideal result, I don't know all the ins and outs of the process that might get this project there. Which means I'm heavily relying on the competency of whoever I employ to do this job for me, whether I'm supervising or not. And unfortunately, not everyone is as conscientious of your property and your neighbor's property as you are. So that means with little experience on my end, there are a lot of things to think about, and things get left out or undone, or not done in a way that I would like them if I'm not there to make sure it happens or if I don't know any better. But once this concrete is cured, it's not going anywhere. So whatever decisions I've made or things that have been neglected are literally set in stone, not unlike the old landline cable you may have spotted in the previous clip. Overall, we ended up pouring a 4-inch slab about 1,800 square feet. A section of that will be used for the new shop, and that section of the slab includes a footing and rebar reinforcement. A final rounding on all the edges of the slab perimeter help the edge resist future chipping and creates a nice, smooth, safe surface. Once the concrete has been left to set for a few hours, it's then brushed for texture. This adds a slip-resistant surface, usually for high traffic areas, whether that be foot traffic or vehicles. The section of the concrete where the new shop will be built does not get brushed. This leaves a smooth surface that'll make it much easier on any rolling equipment I may have in the shop and provide an easier surface to clean and sweep. After a few more hours, the concrete is saw cut at predetermined distances. These cuts will help the concrete contract in a more controlled manner. It's inevitable that the concrete is going to crack. The initial liquid mix is filled with water. When that water leaves the surface of the concrete while curing, the concrete shrinks and cracks. Basically, by creating a fracture in the concrete before the cracking occurs, the concrete is more likely to crack on a specific line below the surface where you've cut the control joint, whereas a natural crack may continue through the entire slab, be unsightly, and possibly structurally damaging. I want to thank you for watching the first video in the shop build series. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I look forward to putting out a whole bunch more of these videos as the shop build continues, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them down below in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and until the next video, you guys have a good one.